turn it over to you.
Are you're all set, Ed? I'm sorry. Yeah.
Yes, I said I had
Oh
just
yeah,
called
yeah.
the meeting to order and turned it over to you, and
Okay, okay.
now
Yeah.
it's your turn to speak and say things.
I'm learning. I'm learning here. All right. Yeah. Thanks everybody for coming, and thanks especially to John Ellsworth from the Vintage Radio and Communications Museum, Connecticut. He's agreed to, you know, give us a little information on the goings on and various other things related to the museum. I know there are many club members who've been there maybe multiple times. I unfortunately haven't made it yet. I'm really looking forward to getting up there at some point. Um, so let me turn it over to somebody who actually knows what they're talking about. And John, feel free to take it from here.
All righty. Well, first of all, I got to say, Don, if you could stand up again and kind of get close to your camera like you just did a minute ago. Stand, yeah. You know what I'm going for. Yeah, there you go. He's got the right shirt on. I can tell he's been there. Anyways, thanks for having me. It sounds like you got a fun group here. Yeah, I'm John Ellsworth. I'm the founding director of the Vintage Radio and Communications Museum. How many of you guys have been there? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, looks like a number of you haven't, so that's good. That's good. Yeah, what I'm going to do is kind of share the history of the museum. A lot of times when I do these talks, people think they're going to hear about the history of communications, and I tell them, I say, you want to learn about that, come up to the museum. But the story of the development of the museum over the last 33 plus years is really kind of fascinating, and that's generally the talk that I do whenever I go out and do this. This is quite nice that I'm doing it from within. So what I'm going to do is share my screen. I've got a PowerPoint, and I will talk over the PowerPoint. You guys got any questions as you go along? You know, pop them right out there, and don't be bashful. So let me see if I can share my screen. It's the one I want right there. And if I go here, you see this please stand by screen? You do?
Yep.
Excellent. And you can still hear me. That's good. Okay. Yeah. When visitors come into the museum, and I try to kind of explain to them what they visit and what they've come to. And I said the best way to describe this is just a hobby that's got totally out of control. And that's basically what has happened. Give you a little bit of the background beforehand. I was a public school teacher. I was a tech ed teacher, industrial arts for us older guys. And couple years into teaching, they knew I knew how to teach, and they were having a hard time keeping electronics teacher. So they asked me to teach electronics, which I knew absolutely nothing about. And I had to learn. And so I did. And after a couple, 3 years of learning, I kind of got into it and was having a lot of fun with it. And to go along with that, I always liked the antiques. And my wife and I would go out tag sailing and flea marketing and so forth. And one day I was at a tag sale, and there was a little vacuum tube All American 5 radio sitting there for like $5, and I bought it because I said, "Gee, I wonder with my newfound knowledge of basic electronics, I could probably fix this." And did a little more reading and fixed it, and that was my first mistake. Before I knew it, I had about 200 of them around the house, and I was an avid collector. But it was kind of cool. We were living in a big old Victorian house in Britain at the time, and we had them all over the place. They fit in so well with all the beautiful woodwork. And whenever we had a party or whatever, people would come in and they just had to know about them. They wanted to know the history, what it was, what year it was from. And so I knew there was interest in these. And so we started to put on public displays at libraries and, you know, any place that people had display areas. And all the displays were greeted by great acclaim. And so in September of 1990, we opened up the first museum, and that was on the bottom end of Arch Street in New Britain. It was a terrible location, but it was cheap. And as you can see from the picture, it was a little corner store front in a 3-family house. And the grand total display space was about 500 square feet of space. And so we set up what we called 5 decades of radios. I was purely a radio collector at that point. And I took out advertising anywhere I could get free advertising. I don't know who that young guy is there, but well, this was back in 1990, so I was a little younger than I am today. But there's the front counter to the very first museum in September of 1990. And you can see some of the artifacts we got along the back wall, the old headphones and some of the early AC or late battery sets that are off there to my left. In doing it, I found out I wasn't the only one that liked old radios. I found a whole bunch of other people started coming to the museum, and many of them became my volunteers. And we started holding flea markets, swap meets. And this is a picture of one of the swap meets out in the yard in the first year and a half, 2 years that we were there. Actually, I think that display is Bob Esslinger. Some of you may know Bob. He did repair work out in Pomfret Center. He's pretty much retired from it now, but he was very active back in the 1990s. Oh, well, look at this. Well, what happened is we didn't predict it, but we got donations. And most of you are thinking dollar signs. Get the dollar signs out of your eyes. There's no dollar signs. Stuff. In fact, there were days where I would come in. The museum was only open Saturday and Sunday because I was doing it by myself. And when I would come back on a Saturday morning, I couldn't get in the building because there's so much stuff piled up in front of the front door. Donations just started to pour in. I had to put them somewhere. We started putting them in the basement of that building we were in, and we weren't renting the basement space. The landlord got a little nervous, and about a year and a half after we opened up, they politely asked us, why don't you go find some other place? And we were out. And keep that year and a half in mind because it seems to repeat quite often. So we started looking around, and one of the people that got involved with us, Russ Baldwin, who was a projectionist and brought in a whole bunch of the movie projection equipment, which expanded us beyond radio, was from East Hartford. And he knew East Hartford was trying to recondition downtown Main Street. And so this is the Comstock building right at the end of Burnside Avenue in East Hartford. We had gone around to many places, many towns, and talked to town managers and mayors, and they all kind of yawned at us. We heard our proposals dropping into the round file as we left. And this was, in this case, Bob DiCrescenzo was the mayor, and he was really trying to put energy into East Hartford, and he loved our proposal. And at the time, the Comstock building was owned by the town. They had taken it for back taxes, and they had refurbished the front of it. They actually put the awning up with our name on it. And if you notice, the name has changed now to not just Vintage Radio Museum, it's Vintage Radio and Communications Museum. Because in those first couple of years, I had a former student who understood the value of collecting old TV sets. And so we added TV, and we added the motion picture I mentioned, and then we had some telephones, and then telegraph and ham equipment. And it all of a sudden became an all communications museum. So this was right in the front and center of the Comstock building. It was 1,600 square feet of space. The front looks great, but the inside was kind of rough. So we got our volunteers in there and refurbished the inside and set it up. And away we went. Here's our ribbon cutting. That's Mayor DiCrescenzo with the scissors, and some of our volunteers sprinkled around us, and we opened up there. It was a perfect location because it rolled right in from the sidewalk. We didn't have any handicap issues or anything. And it was so visible on Main Street, being right at the end of Burnside Avenue. My biggest fear was that somebody would come plowing through the intersection, come right in our front door, and we'd have a car in the front, but it never happened. So, yeah, the display expanded, the collection expanded because of the donations. And here's a little bit more extensive display of the headphones and the early AC and some battery sets off to the left there. So we had a supporter, very, very important supporter. you can't recognize him from the picture, that's Bob Steele. He got wind of us fairly early on and said, "Oh, wow, this is great. This is good stuff you're doing." And he called me and said, "You want me to come talk at your museum?" And I said, "Yeah." And so it was arranged on a Saturday. We had about 70 people there, I think. We advertised it. And he came in and he was supposed to do 45 minutes. We set that nice table up and put some vintage microphones there. And he started chatting, and they got the shepherd's crook out and they couldn't get him off stage. He stayed there for over 2 hours just chatting with everybody, having a great time. Sadly, this was not too long before he passed away. And so we lost one of our big supporters, but that is in the Comstock building when he came and talked at the museum. Oh, no. What happened was the town didn't want to be landlords. And so they had the building up on the market, and a dentist came along and bought the Comstock building and decided he wanted the nice 1,600 square feet of space that we occupied. So we were asked to move, and we worked very closely with the town officials, and we said, "Listen, we're out. The collection's getting bigger. We need a bigger space. What else do you have?" And like maybe 4 doors up the street from the Comstock building was an old IHOP restaurant, the A-frame building. It was just beyond the AAA diner, that sign that you see on the right. If the camera panned up high enough, it's the AAA diner, if you know where that is in East Hartford. And the IHOP building was 2,200 square feet of space. So bigger, which is what we needed. And it had been pretty much empty for a long time. So the for sale sign was on the front of it when we moved in, but it was pretty run down. And so we did a quick rehab job of the inside of it. And on a given Saturday, I put the word out, and basically by word of mouth, 60 volunteers showed up with dollies and wagons and everything else. And the whole collection was rolled up the street. And it doesn't show in this picture, but there was a light snowstorm going on. And it was quite a scene to see all these vintage pieces rolling up the sidewalk on Main Street in East Hartford into the IHOP building. Swap meets continued. There's a big common parking lot between the IHOP building and the AAA diner. And so we would take that over on, we ran like 2 or 3 swap meets a year. And they were very, very popular. Now, if you notice, the building there looks pretty good, because we got into the building and we said, "Well, gee, we can't have a museum in a shabby building." So all the volunteers went to work. We painted that metal roof. We painted the sides. We cleaned it all up, made it look really good. And of course, you know, that would what that would cause. This is the inside. If you remember the old IHOPs where the crisscross windows are, there would be the booth sticking out and you'd be eating your pancakes there. Well, we have our transistor radios there on display. But, you know, when you fix up a building and make it look really good, there's our TV display. You can see we're cramming just about every square foot of that building into display area. Before we go there, yeah, it was during this time we decided to display up at the Big E, and we contacted the Tourism Bureau, and we said, "Do you have provision for museums in the Connecticut building?" Now, keep in mind, this is probably late 90s. And they said, "No, we don't." I said, "Oh, really?" I said, "There's a lot of really good museums in the state of Connecticut that should be being shown off in the Connecticut building." So what we did, as that fair goes on for 3 weeks or so, displays move in and displays move out in the Connecticut building. And quite often an area will lay fallow for 2-3 days before the next display comes in. So we volunteered to fill the empty spaces, and we brought a collection of equipment up there, and we would set up in one area for a couple of days, and then we might have to move it to another part of the building. But we were actually the first museum that was ever set up in the Connecticut building, and it was done that way. And if you've been to the Big E lately, 90% of that building is now taken up by museums. We were the ones that kind of pioneered it. We got a huge bump in attendance after this because people were fascinated as they walked through, and of course, thousands and thousands of people saw what we had. and it was a big incentive. So, oh, fourth home. Well, they sold the IHOP building, was what I was starting to hint at earlier. Because we fixed it up, made it so nice, it was an easy sell for the owner. And out we went. We went back to town hall and talked to the economic development directors and everything. And we said, we're out again. What else you got? And down Main Street, right across from town hall, was the old town hall hardware building. Now, this building is set way back in the back of a parking lot. In fact, it was back so far they built a strip mall in front of it. And this, to the owners, was kind of an albatross because nobody else wanted it. And we said, wait a minute, we'll take it. And for, again, a reasonable rent. This was 5,000 square feet of space, and it was right next to the highway, I-84, coming in from the east. And so we had a big grand opening. We had a live band there playing music. Again, it was fantastic. This sign you see up top there, this is Vintage Radio and Communications Museum. That is milk glass, plexiglass on the front of the old neon sign that used to say Town Hall Hardware. That sign is 50 feet long, and it faces basically due east. So anybody coming down I-84 from Boston area would see that off to their right. They couldn't miss it. The highway is elevated right there, so it is right at eyesight for the cars coming across. And it was fantastic. We built that sign and put it up there. But again, here's another swap meet going on, setting up out front. We had a lot of fun at this building. Shot from inside. One of our volunteers was managing the old, the big plant in Bristol, New Departure plant. It was a huge building. New Departure moved out, and they were starting to subdivide it for other industries. And many of the office spaces were built with Hauserman panels. And the guy that was managing the plant had to get rid of those. And so he told us about it. And we went up there and grabbed the Hausermans. Hausermans, if you don't know, they're kind of clipped together walls. You can just build any configuration you want. So you see the walls going down the backside on the left and on the right. They made beautiful dividers for all of our displays, and it worked very nicely. Like I said, the orphans kept coming in. It didn't stop. And this is not on display, obviously. This is storage in the back of that building. It was more than we could put on display. So the collection just kept growing and growing and growing. And we tried to save every radio and piece of equipment that was out there at this point. But it became a rather huge task. In the foreground, we got into instrumentation. You can see the tombstones and cathedrals in the back, but we diversified in just about every form of electronic communication there was. So it truly became a full communications museum at that time. One of the things we did, a lot of the radios that we had on display were Crosley radios. And we knew there was a group in Connecticut that collected Crosley cars, one in the same company. And so I contacted them, and they said, oh yeah, we'd love to come over and have a car show. And so during one of our swap meets, they brought their cars in, and you should have seen the jaws drop. These little dinky, cute little cars come rolling around the corner and into our parking lot, and people just flipped out. They just dropped what they were doing, but we parked them off to the side of the building. But if you notice in the background, that retaining wall is what's holding up I-84. And it's about 20 feet away from the building that we're in. So that will come into play in a little bit here. But here's more of the Crosleys. They're just, I mean, they're about the size of, if you've never seen one in person, they're about the size of your riding lawnmower. They're super small little cars, and all kinds of cute configurations. There's a better shot of I-84 and the cars right in front, and our building is just out of the picture to the right. And basically what happened after we've been there about a year and a half, there's that. Oh, by the way, we were only in the IHOP building a year and a half. So every place we go, it's been a year and a half. Well, a year and a half into being here, one day we saw a company coming in with a drilling rig, and right where the cars are parked, they were drilling test poles down along the side of the highway. Said, "Uh-oh, something's up." And next thing we know, we get a notice from the state that we have to leave because they're going to widen the highway. And we kind of knew it was going to happen because we'd sit there on a Saturday and the trucks would come up and over the rise from Boston. And as soon as they came over the rise, they'd see the traffic backed up going into Hartford and slam on the brakes, and we'd smell the hot rubber and see the smoke. So they needed to widen the highway. But when your building is 20 feet from a highway, it's got to be widened. Something's got to give. And it was the building. So they finally took it by eminent domain, apparently, because we didn't own it. And I guess they couldn't come to an agreement with the owners. And so this was probably about our lowest point. We were about ready to pack it in. The collection had gotten rather huge. We got kicked down again. East Hartford was out of any buildings big enough to house us. And so we were about ready to quit, and my phone rang, and it was a call from an official, a traffic or highway official from the state. And he said, "Do you run the museum?" I said, "Yes, I do." He said, "Well, you're an up and going entity. We can't put you out of business, so we got to help you out." I said, "Oh, really? I'm all ears." And he said, "Listen, we will definitely cover the cost of moving. But what you got to do is take inventory of everything you have. And that is a moving inventory, which means weight and measure of everything." Well, it took all hands on board about a month and a half. And we finally got a complete inventory. And we sent it out to the 5 major movers in the state. And the cheapest bid to move our collection at that point was $32,000. Give you an idea how big the collection had gotten. So I had one more question for the guy when he called me back. I said, "Oh, that sounds wonderful." But I said, "Listen, we've already been kicked around 3 or 4 times and we always moved ourselves. If we move ourselves, do we still get the $32,000? He said, "Oh, yeah, you bet." And he said, "Another thing," he says, "you got to change advertising and letterhead and all the rest of that stuff. So we're going to tack on another $10,000 and give you $42,000. I didn't tell him we didn't have any letterhead or any advertising, but that was okay too. So the state's going to give us $42,000 to be kicked out of this building. So we let it be known in the greater Hartford area that we were homeless again and looking for someplace to go. And Windsor piped up. And Windsor had the Rappaport building. I don't know if you're familiar with this building or not, but it's right along the railroad tracks. It was built in 3 sections. We're looking at the end of A building, A, B, and C. A building was built back in the 1800s, I think it was. B was built in the early 1900s, and then C building, dog legs around to the right, and was built a number of decades later. This house housed a number of different companies over the years. Some were communicating. Eddy Electric was in there, which was kind of cool. They made generators and dynamos. Tobacco industry was in there, but it is a huge building. Altogether, it's 86,000 square feet of space. And this front end is the oldest piece, and it had a wide open section. They built the roof. You see how it's kind of strange up top. It was built like a bridge trestle so that there were no supporting columns in between there. I'm sure you've all been in an old factory where you've got a brick wall, 2 brick walls about 50 feet apart, and then 2 rows of columns going down, splitting it up into thirds. This section of this building had nothing between the 2 brick walls. It was wide open space. It was fantastic. Old hardwood floor. So the owner had a young developer who was trying to develop the building, and he was looking for an attraction. We talked to him, and so we worked out a deal, and we moved into this front section here. But as you can see, a lot of work had to be done. You can see the wall spalling off there. Was not handicapped accessible. You can see the stairs going in. But the town was great because they said you got to operate to live. So they let us operate in a basically non-conforming building. You notice the sign, that's the same sign that was down in East Hartford. We took it off that building and put it on this building. But it's still a 50-foot long sign with our name on it. And we were into the Rappaport building. Some of the displays, there's the office dividers, some of the office dividers we had. But we set up displays, we entertained people, and it was working very, very well. But Nobody else moved into the building. The developer couldn't get anybody else in there. And so finally he had like a drop dead date with the owner, and the owner threw him out. So now we're in a building that's not up to code with no developer and cavernous. It's huge. And so one night I got my phone rang like at 10:30 at night. And it was John Moynihan, which is the name of the fellow who owned the building. He's old, retired. He's in Florida. And he says, "Are you the guy that runs a museum in my building?" I said, "Yeah." He says, "Tell me about it. I haven't been up there." So we started to chat, just small talk primarily, and spent about a half an hour on the phone. Then I hung up. I said, "Well, that was pleasant. That's nice to know our landlord." And a couple of nights later, he called me back. He said, "John, why don't you buy the building?" I said, "Wait a minute. This is an 86,000 square foot industrial complex." I said, "Okay, I'll talk to the town about it." So I hung up with him, and I got a meeting with the town manager and the economic development director. And I told them what he had told me to do. And they talked it over a little bit. And they said, "Listen, you got the 42,000 from the state, offer them $100,000 for the building." I said, "You're crazy." I said, "This is a huge multi-million-dollar complex." They said, "No, no, no, do it. He's owned it for ages. He's made millions off of it. He just wants out from underneath it. Do it." I said, "Okay." So that next night I called Moynihan back, and I held the phone way out away from my ear because I figured he's going to blast me. And I said, "Would you take 100,000 for the building?" And without a hesitation, he says, "Yeah, you bet. And I'll take the mortgage back." So we went from being kicked around as a tenant back and forth to owning this humongous industrial structure. And we spent the next 5 years basically working with the town to find a developer who would condo with us. We just wanted to give us this section, give us the A section of the building. You can take B and C and do anything you want with it, but that would make us mortgage free and pretty much set us up for life. We courted every big developer from Boston to New Jersey. They all came in and did their drawings and their beautiful elevations and their sketches and did their presentations. And they all said, "Well, listen, we'll buy the building from you and then rent that section back to you." And we knew what was going on. If they did that, then a couple of years down the road, they'd say, "Oh, your rent's up. See you later," and kick us out. And they'd have the whole building. This happened to the Parham Foundation out in California right about the same time. And I knew about that. I'm a firm believer that things happen in life for a reason, and that happened to let me know that you don't do this. And so we refused, and we did this for like 5 years. The town, this was like the last piece of redevelopment for the town of Windsor. And so we were kind of blocking their last redevelopment. So finally, after not being able to find anybody that was going to agree to those terms, we went back to the town and said, "Listen, we've already moved 5 times. We really don't want to move again, but this is not working." And we said, "Do you have anything else in town?" And they did. This is one of the swap meets at the Rappaport building. Let me back up one. That building across the way is the train station in Windsor. And between the cars that are parked here in the train station is the train track. It went right by the side of the building. Rather loud when it went through and the building shook. But it was a great place. We had a lot of success there, but it wasn't going to work. So they came up with 115 Pearson Lane. This is an 18,000 square foot industrial building. It was set up to be like 5 or 6 industrial suites. It had problems. The people we bought it from were rehabbers. And there was environmental issues because they used to dump their oils out back. So they dug up all kinds of earth and tried to clean it up and put a new roof on the building. But basically, this building was a shell. In fact, you see a sidewalk there. We had that sidewalk put in. There was no sidewalk going into this building when we got it. But we parlayed the other building into this. We bought this building for $600,000. Took out a $400,000 mortgage with John Quigley, the fellow who was selling it to us. And that was about going on 17 years ago now, I think. And this is where we are now and are still. Everything you're going to see in these pictures, all the finish, you see the nice wood floor along the bottom and the beautiful walls, was done by volunteers. This was a shell. It was an empty shell with raw concrete floors, basically no walls. It was just very, very rough inside, and it was the volunteers that built it out. By the way, at this point on my volunteer list, I have an email list I sent out to 84 volunteers. Other people that work or run volunteer organizations don't know how the heck we get that many volunteers, but we just make sure we make it fun and we have a good time, and a lot of people want to help out with this. So that's right in the front lobbies. You come in the front door, is where we are there. We have an old refrigerator. There's a different one now. This one died on us. We had to get another one, but it's very similar to it. And we sell Avery soda out of that in the front lobby. What do you do with dud tubes? Most people shoot them with a BB gun or throw them out. We turn them into chess sets. This is excuse me, is actually a high-end item in our gift shop. And we guarantee every one is unique because every time we build one, it's different. This is the higher end one because it's got all the globe tubes. You know, if there was ST tubes, it wouldn't be quite as expensive. Newer tubes, cheaper chess set, you know, but we've sold a few of those. European radios. We've got a collection primarily in the 1950s, but it's really cool to see the different design concept Europe had about radio than America. And so we show that, compare and contrast them. The TV collection is growing, and I got a sidelight and tell you a really cool story that just happened. We have, you can see this display of TVs that has grown quite a bit, but just recently we were approached by a fellow from Littleton, Mass, and he claimed to have the earliest of color TV sets. Now, Kirk Stankiewicz is one of my former students and went on to work for RCA, cut his teeth on vacuum tube technology till they turned over to all transistor. So he understands how to repair these, and pretty much all these sets you see in the picture now are up and running in the display. But he at one time acquired a CT100. For those that don't know what that is, that was the very first color TV set that RCA put out. CBS the year before had come up with a color system, but it was a proprietary system where you had to have a special TV to receive it. And the FCC licensed them, but they said this is never going to fly, and it didn't. So in 1954, RCA introduced the color compatible system, which means if you couldn't afford a color TV, you still got a black and white image. And the way they introduced it was they produced a Model 5. They produced 100 of these, and they distributed them all over the country. And on January 1st, 1954, they color televised the Rose Bowl parade on those Model 5s. Now, the Model 5s were never marketed after this publicity stunt. RCA tried to collect them all back in, and that was the predecessor of the CT100. Well, this gentleman that we collected these items from had 2 Model 5s. We are trying to figure out how the heck he got a hold of them, but he had 2 Model 5s, and he had 2 CT100s. And then he, at the end of 1954, they came out with a 22-inch TV, which was the next model, which was a CT225, or I'm probably getting the model number mixed up, but we now have 2 of those. So we have pre-market TVs, and Kirk feels that he can get probably one of the Model 5s working as well as hopefully the CT100. When he had his and he loaned it to the museum for a year or two, I had guys coming in to the front door, and it was like they had blinders on. They come to the front desk and they say, "We heard you got a CT100." And I said, "Yes, we do." They said, "We heard it works." I said, "Yes, it does. Would you like to see it?" And they paid their admission. One time I went around the corner to see what the guy was doing. He was kneeling in front of the CT100 watching whatever we had coming through it. It was like he'd gotten to Mecca. You know, he was like bowing to Mecca. And now we're going to have 3 times as much stuff as we had there. So just exciting stuff that's been happening, and the donations keep coming in. It's unbelievable. For you hams, our ham equipment, many of you probably know we have a ham station there, W1 VCM. We just got a $15,000 grant for them, and they're going to satellite radio. They're setting up on another whole station just outside of their ham booth. But we have both vintage and modern equipment. They have what is it? Software defined. I'm not a ham, as you can tell. Software defined radio they've got going on in there. It's quite something what's happening inside the ham shack. There's about 35 guys who are members of the club, and they're doing a phenomenal job with it. Jukeboxes. We have a whole history of jukeboxes. Some of the purists say, oh, those aren't communication devices, but a lot of good stuff happened around jukeboxes. So we actually have a 1930s, a 1940s, a 1960s, and a 80s. So you can see the evolution of the jukebox, and they're all basically working. Some of the golden age of radio, some of the pieces here. I see American Bosch, the two sitting on top of the console in the middle, and I think the one on top of the console on the right is American Bosch, of course, made right up in Springfield, Mass. You might have seen this in some of the other earlier pictures. I got this from a used appliance place down the south end of Hartford. I got wind of it and I walked down there. I got down there and the guy had it on display just as kind of a novelty thing, and I talked him out of it. This is a Crosley refrigerator with a radio built into it from 1939. There are only 3 known to still exist. Crosley Museum in California has one. We have one. We saw one go for sale about 6 or 7 years ago on eBay, but a very, very rare piece. Don't know how many they produced. The radio in there was an option. There's 4 bolts that hold that panel on. You can take the radio panel off, put a regular panel on there, and you got a regular Crosley refrigerator. But we have one, and the radio works in this. One of our most photographed walls, the tabletop radios. Once they saturated the market for having a radio in every home, they then went on to build radios to go in every room. And so the design changed to be specific to certain rooms. And this is just a kind of a collection of a variety of smaller tabletop radios there, the old horn speakers on top.
I'm sorry, can you go back to that slide?
Sure.
There's a radio up in the corner there. It's on the top shelf. It's white. Next is in the first slot. I think I have the exact same thing in black. It's a Japanese radio. You open up the panels. Is that true?
Yes. That was a mystery. I actually found that at an antique shop.
Yeah.
And I almost missed it because closed up, it looks like a bread box, right?
Yeah. I got mine when I was a shortwave listener and an antique collector before I got my license. Yeah. And I got that at the what's the building that they tore down in New Haven? They used to have an antique show in there every year.
Oh, yeah.
Coliseum?
The Coliseum, right. And
Yeah.
I was walking past it and the door was slightly open. And I thought it was a period in the U.S. in the 40s and the 30s where Asian music and was very popular. It's even in like Rhapsody in Blue, they have this Asian section in there. And I thought that it was just a box to collect. I opened it up, there's a radio sitting in it. But I have mine in black, but it's the same design on the front.
Yeah.
That you have there.
Do you know the brand?
No, I'll go take a look. Just keep talking.
Well,
I'll be a second.
The thing is,
know.
with this one, there was no brand name on it. We finally figured out. I think you'll find it's an Ansley. Ansley
Okay.
did some strange things. But yeah, it was in an antique shop, and I walked by it thinking it's a bread box, but they had wrapped the cord around it. And I went back and said, "What does a bread box need a cord on it for?" And I opened up, son of a gun, it was a radio.
Yeah.
But yours is the only other one we've heard of. They're very, very rare.
There you go.
And there is no
markings.
markings.
Talk later, you know.
Yeah, there's no markings on it telling you who made it, at least not on ours. But by cross-referencing the layout, we believe it's an Ansley. So, yeah. But a whole mix of things. There's a coin operated radio in there that would be in a motel. If you look kind of down towards the lower left, you see like two silver things sticking up on both ends. That's the porta-bar radio. What a great concept. You know, if you got the big game coming up on Sunday, you don't want to miss any plays. So they built the radio into a portable bar. And those are the two decanters on either end with your gin and your whatever on the other end, and all the glasses are on top of it. So you got everything you need. You won't have to miss a play. You just drink to your heart's content right there. This corner to the right, you see an early battery set radio with the top open. That is our Connecticut display, and it is much fuller than what you see in this picture. I believe that's a Tusca that's shown there, CD Tusca made down in Hartford. We also have Victrolas. There's one in the front. That one is there because it was sold at G. Fox and Company in Hartford. But then in the background, you see some of the motion picture stuff, and there's quite a bit more. These pictures are a bit dated. We've added quite a bit to them. But that is our motion picture corner over there that you're looking at. Again, these are high end. The one on the left is a Scott with a motorized tuning, all chrome chassis. And the other one I think is a Westinghouse, I believe. Kind of high end pieces over there. Or no, GE, sorry, GE. We have right now we have one Tesla coil up and working, the one on the left, the one on the right blew a transformer. But we demonstrate the Tesla coil as probably the highlight of the tour for the kids. But the cabinet in between there is showing crystal sets. So we talk about crystal sets. We do crystal building classes where in about an hour and 45 minutes, people of any age can take the class, and we teach them how to build a radio from scratch, and we test it and they take it home at the end, and I throw in as much radio and wave theory as they can stand. So there's our Connecticut section, but is much more packed than this. That's LK on the right end. That's a Bristol Super C speaker in the middle, and then the Tusca on the left. Inside the cabinet, you see some Connecticut telephone and telegraph, but over the years, this is just filled up with all kinds of stuff in here. Tube display. Again, we consider those a work of art, and it's beautiful to see all the different configurations, and so people enjoy seeing those. And like I said, we do have Victrolas all the way back to an early Edison home machine. So we give tours to everybody who'll let us give tours, basically, and a lot of people come in here and they think, oh, we'll spend 20 minutes and get the heck out. And 4 hours later, they're still going strong and begging us for more. So we explain the whole background. We've got everything set up in a chronology where they start pre-electronic, then we bring them up through the Victrolas, and then the introduction to telegraph, wireless telegraphy, leading to radio, you know, and so on. So they can see how the technology developed through the ages. Close up the vacuum tubes, mostly Arcturus blues in the back there. And even the screen printing on the boxes, in many cases, works of art. Some of the pieces have been coming in recently. And this is what makes it fun for my volunteers. We call it Christmas every day up there, because when these donations come in, many times none of us, and we probably have well over 500 years of collecting experience amongst us, we still see stuff coming in that none of us have ever seen before. This was one of them that came in a couple of years ago from a couple in Farmington. This is a Colin B. Kennedy, which was a West Coast company, so you don't see a lot of Colin B. Kennedys out here. But Colin B. Kennedy put out a Model 50 Cathedral. And if you use your imagination, just look at the middle section of that and chop the bottom off, chop the clock off, and round the top. That is their Model 50 Cathedral. Well, this one is a Model 50A. So apparently what they did is on the Model 50 Cathedral, they decided to build grandfather clock style radio, probably a short run of them. There probably weren't many of them produced, but we actually have one in the museum now. So we have been discovered by a number of what I call Hollywood types. Mysteries of the Museum has been there 2 times, I believe, so far. The first time they were trying to debunk the idea of the hotline on the president's desk to Moscow. Everybody has this impression that it's a red phone sitting on the president's desk. There was no phone system. It was a teletype system. And Mysteries of the Museum were searching all over the place to find somebody who had a working teletype machine. We did. So Don Wildman actually came up to the museum. We filmed, we sat in front of it, we ran the teletype machine, and they did a whole section out of it based on the one that we have in the museum. Since then, my guys have tied it in with a Raspberry Pi, and there's 3 buttons you can hit after you turn it on. One gives you a welcome to the museum. The second button gives you the up to the date weather coming off of the internet. And the third one gives you the news headlines coming off the AP or whatever. I don't know however they do it now, but they've tied it in so we can actually do live feed into it. After 30 some odd years of doing this, we keep on finding new things to display. And it's funny how these things evolve. The piano you see in the far wall in the back in the middle is another Ansley, just like that other radio we were just talking about. Ansley did some strange stuff. And it's not just a piano, it's from 1939. And you see the 2 wooden areas on both sides with like a handle on them. The one on the left pulls out to be a turntable, a record player, and the one on the right opens up to give you a radio. So they built a radio and a turntable into a piano, I guess thinking that people would want to play along with their favorite music. Where would their favorite music be in 1939? On a 78 record or on the radio. So there it was, and we had this tie-in to a keyboard. And at one of our meetings, the whole structure, the museum is every Saturday morning we have a volunteer meeting at 8 a.m. We talk about what's happened that week, what we're going to do in the coming future, and we go about doing it, and that's it. And at one of those meetings, I happened to mention that I grew up in a household with a player piano in it. I didn't realize Paul Horgan, one of my volunteers, belonged to an International Player Piano Society. So he put the word out that the museum was looking, and the one on the left, the upright honky tonk, came from Long Island. Paul actually went down with his trailer and picked that up. But at the same time, the one on the right was offered from Eastern Massachusetts, and it is a player piano. I didn't know they made player pianos in a grand format, but they do. And on top of that, that is an Ampico system, which means that it plays with expression. The scrolls that go onto that piano will not fit on the honky tonk. They're a special type that has extra holes that tells the piano how to play each note that it plays. So it plays with expression. And we have both of those up and working. And actually, this picture was taken early after we got this collection. In that back left corner that you see now are huge boxes set up. We have over 600 Ampico rolls that were donated from New Jersey. It's amazing how things come together. The piano comes from Massachusetts. The scrolls to play on it came from New Jersey. Don't ask me how it happened, but it did. The other crazy thing we've done is we've gone around and collected the transmitters from many of the radio stations in Connecticut and beyond, actually. The one you see peeking out from the left was the original transmitter, the Westinghouse transmitter from WPOP in New Britain, Newington. And this had been talked about for a number of years. And if you're familiar with where that transmitter house is, it's down in a gully right behind CCSU, and it's very swampy. And the engineers that were in there finally noticed that there were starting to be rust pock marks starting to show up all over it. They said, we got to get it out of here, though. So they sped up the process a bit. We went in there and pulled it. You're seeing one of 3 cabinets. It extends about 9-10 feet out. It dates from 1935. The interesting thing is we don't know when the first commercially built transmitters were made. We haven't found any information on that. I mean, the first radio station came on the air in 1920, KDK in Pittsburgh. And for many years, the engineers cobbled together homemade transmitters. We don't know when the first commercial one was put out, but it's hard to find anything much before 1935. The one on the right that you see there is an RCA of about the same age It's a 250H, I believe, is the model on it. And if you look up the history of RCA transmitters, it's one of the first 4 that RCA produced. Funny story with that. One of my guys was skimming eBay, and they spotted this, and it was up on eBay, put up there by the AWA, the Antique Wireless Association, up in the Rochester area. And we've done a number of things with them. So I contacted them, and I said, "What's the story on this transmitter you got up on eBay?" And they said, "Why?" I said, "Well, we're putting together a transmitter alley." They said, "Oh, if we'd known that, we would have given it to you." So they had it up for $99. We sniped it for $100. And Bob Allison and I drove up there in my Suburban, and we put that thing 2500 Suburban, so it handled it, and drove it all the way back. We don't know the history of that one. The one you see behind it is an early Armstrong FM transmitter that came out of Cheshire. There was a microwave company down there using it to test their microwave, and we didn't take it apart, so that will still work. If we chose to fire that up, we could fire it up and make it go. There are several others back there. We have the first FM transmitter from RCH FM, 100.5. We also have the 1957 Gates transmitter number 3 that came off of Avon Mountain. That was their number 3 transmitter up on TIC. And then we have the audio stage transmitter from Channel 30 television in the back left corner. So this is what we call transmitter alley. We figure most people don't get to see the transmitters that put out the radio signal that comes to their radio. So we now have a bunch. There's a better shot of the POP one where you can see 2 of the 3 sections there. So we're cleaning up, trying to make it look good, but don't think we're going to fire it up. We don't want to pay the bills. Oh, this is the FM transmitter from WRCH. It's Collins, which was top of the line transmitter for the FM back then. I mentioned the crystal sets. This kid is probably about 35 now. This is a long old picture, but this is what we call the eureka moment, when the kids first hear the first sound coming through that little radio that they just built. And it's quite popular. In the next 3 weeks, I think I'm doing three classes. Of one's a scout troop, one is a homeschooling group, and I forget what the third one is. But they've become very, very popular. We also do, well, hopefully we'll doing this again. This is a repair class. We invite guys that love to tinker that have a pet project that they're struggling with. They bring it in, and Danny Fitzen is the gentleman all the way in the background there with the green shirt. And Ben is the fellow with the beard on the right over here, and they kind of teach the class. Danny has just had open heart surgery, and he's still in the recovery phase, but we're hoping he's going to be back up and going pretty soon so we can do this. I get requests all the time. When's the next class? When's the next class? Well, got to wait until Danny gets back on his feet. Just some of the things that we offer. That's our front lobby there at the museum.
They used to have a radio class in Manchester. That was, I think it ran 8 weeks or something on a Wednesday night or something. You bring in your radios. Did you guys have anything to do with that?
I taught it.
Oh,
well, I did, and then Larry Chestnut took it over after a while. But we started that. That was in conjunction with the museum. Mike Heisa was a professor up there at Manchester, and also a radio enthusiast collector. And so he and I got together and we started that class that ran for a number of semesters. Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to get to that, but I just couldn't get there by, I think it was 6 o'clock you started, or 6:30.
Yeah.
I would have to have left New Haven. I couldn't do it, but I often think, every time I go past Manchester, I think about that, what might have been.
Keep your fingers crossed that Danny gets back on his feet, because he wants to do that. And he ran Danny's TV and radio repair over in East Windsor, and I think he's retiring out of that now after everything he's been through, but he wants to come play at the museum, he says. So let's hope he can pull it off and do it. This was, 3 years ago now? The 100th anniversary of the first amateur transmission across the pond. Edwin Howard Armstrong was involved in this, and they set up a transmitting station in Greenwich, Connecticut, and they sent one of their guys, one of their engineers over to Scotland, I think it was. And one night they broadcast and we're actually able to receive it over there in Scotland. This is in a time when Marconi was insisting that you needed these huge high power things. And Edwin himself was saying, no, you don't. And so they did this to set up basically to disprove Marconi's theory that it has to be these big monsters, equipment with high power. And they did it. Well, the AWA guys out in Rochester had built a reproduction of the transmitter. That's what you see in the lower right-hand picture of this poster. And they had built it, I think, for the 75th anniversary, and they held on to it. And now with the 100th anniversary, they called us up and said, how would you like to? It was 1921, so we did it in 2021. And so their plan was to pack that transmitter, bring it down to the museum, because Connecticut was where the original transmission came out of. And we set it up. We had it on display all day on a Saturday. And then that night at 6 o'clock, they began transmitting. And boy, what a finicky piece of equipment that was. We had resistors evaporate. We had a fuse that just disappeared. It just fried and disappeared. But we did get up and running. Some of you guys might have known about it because they let it be known that to put your ears on and listen for it. And we got feedback from all over the country, and we got to Ireland. We didn't get to Scotland. We didn't get any response out of Scotland, but we got to Ireland. So we considered it was success. And we reproduced that first transmission with the same equipment that was done 100 years ago in 1921, which was really kind of fun. Collaboration between the AWA, the ARRL, and us. It was a fun project. I've added these on recently because of all the stuff I was telling about that's going on in the ham station. There's their software-defined display. Very, very fascinating to visitors. We have glass walls on the ham shack, so people can even see this from out in the main display area. And we try to keep the hams there as much as we can during open hours. So if somebody is curious, they can go in and talk to the hams and they can tell them what's going on. So been some huge advances with the ham equipment. Here's some of our vintage equipment in there. What are those, Nationals, I think? There's our call letters, W1 VCM. And this we acquired recently, a very early Paragon that we've added to the collection. Adams Morgan Company, Continental Radio and Electric Corporation, sole distributors. This Gates transmitter came out of mid-Atlantic area, and ARRL wasn't sure they wanted it, but at the time they decided if we accepted it, they would set it up over there and we would run it. And so it was set up over at the ARRL for a number of years and run over there. And then the administration changed and they said, get it out of there. So we trucked it back over to the museum. And this is now set up right outside of the ham shack. The ham shack is just to the right here. And the guys have it up and running, and they're doing AM shortwave through an old Gates transmitter. So another working feature. We try to have as many things in the floor working as possible so people can see it. Here's the tubes lit up on the inside of it. One of my volunteers is a really good photographer, so he took many of those pictures. Here it is opened up. And this, I guess it's running right into it. That's cool. Just some general shots around. We called this Museum After Dark because what we did is we took all the house lights and turned them off and just kept all the display lights on. And what you see in the background are the jukeboxes, and in the foreground are the TVs. Whoop. So lights are turned down and everything's lit up. Kind of a cool effect. Very Art Deco lamp that somebody donated to us. One of my volunteers, actually. He said, what do you think of this? I said, well, yeah, let's put it on display. There's the jukeboxes. One of the jukeboxes. Here's our repair bench. We have an old repair bench. And at the time, we were very tight for space. And we were hemming and hawing as to whether we were going to take it. And then the fellow produced a picture of when it was brand new. And much of the equipment that you see there is the same as what was in the original picture. So we're working on trying to restore it to its original format based on the picture. It's kind of a time capsule. We get a lot of vintage light bulbs come in with the tubes. So we light them up. You know, it's the rheostat up in the upper right-hand corner. We run them at a low voltage and they'll last forever. Just a novelty set. And then we've got up top, we've got some of the Catlins on display and the novelty phones on the bottom. One of the Victrolas. That's an electrified Victrola. Very few of those made, but it is electrified with a motor to turn the turntable, and everything else is still acoustic. Rare piece. And that's it. That's the whole show. I can stop sharing so we can all come back. If you got any questions.
Yeah, I have one other question. What are your thoughts on the attempt to remove and restore the Titanic radio room? Do you think it should stay down there as a memorial to those who died, or do you think it should be removed?
You know, it is, I mean, it is a graveyard, and we have a picture on display of if it's not the original, it is exact replica of that radio room. I don't think it's really necessary to bring it up. And in what condition is all that stuff going to be in, you know, 110 years later or whatever it is that it's been. So I would say leave it alone, let it lie. And you know, there's enough documentation on what was on that ship. So, you know, we have a spark gap transmitter that was made in New Britain in 1917. And I used that to tell the story of the Titanic and what happened that night, which was only 5 years before it. And the spark gap transmitter they had on the Titanic is very, very similar to the one that we have sitting there that actually works. So the people can come and hit the key and the spark jumps the gap. So yeah, I think it's rather extreme to go down there and pull stuff.
By the way, that company that you mentioned about in Cheshire was called Microtech. They're still in business.
Mm-hmm.
John,
Yeah.
NY API, let me test your memory on a piece of equipment. You've got a Gonset Super 6. Do you know where you got that from? It's a converter.
Yeah, I wouldn't. You know, if paperwork was filled out on it, we have it in a file somewhere. That's one of my biggest fears in running this museum is that you don't know the volume. We have, if you haven't been there, we have 4,000 square feet on display. And it runs from the 1800s all the way up to early personal computers. And it's packed. The pictures you saw in this presentation were taken probably close to 15 years ago, and new stuff has come in and has been added. Behind the 4,000 square feet, we have another 7,000 square feet that is primarily dedicated to storage, and we built shelves up to the rafters.
Yeah.
The collection is huge, and people do that sometimes. They give us this radio, and it's we've become very selective now. We don't take everything in, and some people are a little disappointed. But I tell them, consoles especially, it's sad that people kept consoles because I guess they felt they were major pieces of furniture. But if any of you are into the old radios, consoles, you cannot give them away. Go on Facebook Marketplace and look, and you'll see a ton of them there for nothing, and they'll sit there. We put consoles out at every swap meet with $10 on them, and most of the time we're hauling them back in at the end of the day. The more valuable ones are the smaller ones. Right now, the hot thing is the M.C.M, the mid-century modern, the 1950s. I got them, a couple of them on the ladder behind me. You can kind of see it here. It's amazing. It is the you know, from basically, I'm looking at you guys, we're all pretty much the same generation. Those cheap 1950s radios that we grew up with are now the hot items, and people are paying big bucks for them. So,
well, the reason why I asked is because my father had one and it was in the car, and I spent hundreds of hours listening to that thing. And and when I saw that thing, it just blew me away.
Yeah. Well, we do. I know we have Gonset equipment there. You'd have to talk to one of the hams as to exactly which ones we have, you know.
Yeah.
But
I think if I come there next time, I'm going to ask if I can pick it up and see if there's anything written on it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, you should. You should.
Hey, John, you didn't mention the telephone exchange you got there.
Well, yeah, we
I
do
mean, it
have a
takes
whole.
50 feet long.
Yeah, we have a whole central switching system. SNET was trying to move out of their #2 building, which overlooks Bushnell Park in Hartford. It was 13 stories tall, and they wanted to sell the building, and they had 13 stories of high-rise racks with all telephone equipment on it. So they contacted us, they contacted museum in Oregon, and they contacted museum up in Maine, and they opened up for a day, and we were able to go in and tag. We actually tagged 6 bays, and we could take the bays out. And huge, you know, we actually had to cut them down because in the earlier building, they were, the ceiling was too low and we had to cut them down, but they're probably close to 13 or 14 feet tall. And they're just loaded with all the racks of all the stuff. And that building was full of that stuff. That building had no flooring in the corners for about 5 foot square because it was just a huge bundle of wire traveling from floor to floor to floor. The scale of this thing was immense, and they had the rolling ladders that roll on a track in the ceiling, and they could lock it in place. The technician would run up, and they had a live track in the ceiling where they could plug their soldering iron in and take out the offending part, put the new part in, come down the ladder, and run off to the next problem. And that's what they did all day long.
The interesting thing, John, is you have that thing operating. There's, you know, they got the stepper relays are all working, the rotary switches are working, and you got a phone booth on either end. You can call the other end of the switch, which is pretty neat.
Well, most of it is not, but we do have a sample stepper that works, and we demonstrate how the stepper works and talk about that whole story. We do have 3 telephones tied together, so you can have kind of like a party line. Kids go nuts. It's amazing. I mean, kids that are 12 and under don't know how to dial a phone. And it's amazing because we teach them, and we never realized, us growing up, what a cool feeling that was to put your finger in a hole and spin it around. And the kids start playing with that, and they never see the rest of the museum. All the kid tours end there because, you know, an hour later, mom and dad are looking at their watches, so kids, we got to go home, and they're still playing with the phones. It's really fascinating to young kids. I had a middle-aged lady come in a number of years ago, and she just lit up when she saw all the dials, and she was going around turning all of our dials. And out in our gift shop, we have a bunch of reconditioned phones that people can buy to take home as a retro piece. And she went out there and was testing, and she'd roll, nope, nope, oh, that's it. She was looking for the phone that sounded and felt like the one she had when she grew up. She bought it and took it home. You know, we didn't realize what kind of a cool thing it was. New generation is finding out. So there you go. I like the red one there, Bart. Yep. Is that on the president's desk?
That's a working phone. That's what he actually uses every day.
Goes right to Putin.
That is a working phone. I do use it.
Yeah, you know what we found too? It's kind of interesting. I haven't been in business for like 33 years. Back, remember we had some severe ice storms and all the power went out and everybody had their cordless phones and they would pick it up and they were dead because the base station was plugged in and they were without, you know, and cell phones weren't quite as common back then. This was going to be 15, 20 years ago. And we had all these reconditioned phones on display. They were selling like hotcakes because they realized that if they had a hardwired phone in the wall, doesn't matter if the power of the house is out, the phone still worked. And so we had a huge sale of phones, and now that's tapered off again because everybody's got the cell phone. And as long as the cell tower is still standing and it's not a hurricane and, you know, there's power to the cell tower, they don't have the problem. But we saw a huge bump in the sale of landline phones for a short period of time, and then it all kind of went away. We still have them for sale out there, and occasionally people pick them up as a novelty piece, but who has a landline anymore? I got rid of mine myself. Here I am, you know, antique radio communications director, and I got rid of my landline because it was just sitting there doing nothing. So,
well, you got to get Bart as one of your volunteers because he has a landline and he doesn't own a smartphone. So
There you go. Well, you know, this, let me share with you, we are in a, I guess you'd call it growing pains right now, but we've always had the, oh, sorry, my dog just knocked something over. But we're in growing pains now because we've always had a cutoff around 1970s and 80s. We stopped with personal computers. But what we realize is technology is moving ahead so fast. There's a vast section from, say, the 80s up through 2000, 2010. All that stuff is being thrown out. The Razor phones, the flip phones, the, you know, all that kind of stuff. The first CD player, the first CD recorder, the first DVD player. And the problem is we're in such a throwaway society now that all that stuff is going to be chucked before we get a chance to collect it. So we just generated a list, as a matter of fact. And on the list, I have the item, say again, CD player. I think the first CD player was, I think it was a Sony, and it came out in 1979. So I made a whole list of all this technology, the very first item that came out in that category and when it came out. And we are now looking for it. People would always come to the museum and say, well, what are you looking for? I said, I'm not looking for anything because we're getting inundated with donations. But now this stuff that people aren't really looking at it as valuable, we realize that in another 10, 15 years, it's going to disappear and there's not going to be any record of it. So we're starting to look for that era of stuff, the first of all of that. What we figure is, you know, if the first CD player came out in 79 and we find one from 81, that's pretty close. We'll put that on display. But then if another comes in that was produced in 80, we'll put that on display and we'll work our way back to the original if we can ever find an original. But it's a whole generation there that's got to be at least collected and stored away until it's time to display it. That's where we're at right now, is trying to find that stuff and preserve it for the museum.
hey, John, what percentage of the of your museum is in working condition, or what percentage isn't in working condition?
That is a constantly changing figure to the positive. Like I said, Kirk Stankiewicz came in and he's working with me now, and all those TVs initially were not working. Pretty much every TV we have on the floor, and we doubled the TV space there. The shot that I showed you was one side. The other side of that aisle now is all covered with TVs too, and they're all pretty much working. Peter Knight is our battery specialist, battery set specialist. We've got, I think we got 4 Atwater breadboards in the collection, including their Model 2, which is real early, and Peter's got all of them working. So that's one of the things these guys do. And like I said, the thing I've learned by doing this, I wasn't trained to run volunteer organizations. I just kind of learned as we went, but I realized that if the place was fun, people would keep coming back. You know, and I tell people that. I said, if you want to volunteer, people will come and say, gee, I want to volunteer in the museum. What do you want me to do? And I said, no. Wait, let me ask you, what do you want to do? Because if somebody comes to volunteer and I give them a job that they hate, I never see them again. But if I let them go and play and do whatever they want in the museum, it benefits the museum and they are happy and want to come back and play some more. It's a big kids' playground, basically, is the way we have to look at it. And as long as we do, it's amazing the stuff that's happening. Like I said, I just described to you the teletype machine worked, but never was really connected to any information source. Now you just hit a button and it just starts typing away like Walter Cronkite is there, and you know, spits out stuff. So Hi-Fi Alley, Dan Thomas is my specialist there, and we have most everything in Hi-Fi Alley running high-end Marantz pieces, running Serwin Vega speakers. We have 2 different types of Klipsch heresies. We have a solid state side of the aisle for hi-fi, and we have a vacuum tube side, and we have a Macintosh 225. We just picked up some more of that stuff. We got a Fisher, can't remember the model number, but all the vacuum tube stuff is on one side going to a pair of Wharfdale speakers, and all the solid state is on the other side. And we can knock your socks off in there with that equipment. So I would say 50% and growing, give you a number. It's just a guess. But yeah,
I
we
thought it would
built
be higher than that.
It may be. I'm trying to be conservative, but we have a repair facility we built in the back so the guys can do the repair right there. We don't repair for the public. We repair for anything we put up on eBay and anything we're going to put on display. So it's growing. I mean, that's the thing. A lot of people, when they come see the museum, they say, oh, it must be all federally funded. And I said, nope. There is no federal funding or exterior funding at all. The museum for 33 years has been self-supporting. And the way we do it, and it's funny, what I call the real museum people come in and they're shocked because, you know, I get an art museum person coming in and they've got a one-of-a-kind Monet hanging on the wall. Well, they could never consider selling that to help support the museum. But we are representing mass-produced equipment. So if we already have one Marantz 2500, we don't need two Marantz 2500. So we keep the better one, and we do eBay every week. Well, they just ended. We'll be putting new up Saturday, but every week we have stuff up on eBay, and that is the main income, as well as we have annual memberships, we have admissions, we sell vacuum tubes. We have a warehouse of well over 100,000 vacuum tubes that we make available to people that are trying to restore old radios. We have a library that has all the writers and all the S.A.Ms. So if you're looking for a schematic to fix a vintage piece of equipment, we've got it. And, you know, we charge $5 for a copy. So all these little income sources all pooled together, and we've been solvent every single step of the way for 33 years.
Question?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, excuse me. I heard you mention the name Stankiewicz. Would that be Kirk Stankiewicz?
That sure is. Yep.
Ah, he was my instructor. I was department head at Goodwin Tech.
There you go.
I haven't seen him for years, so
yeah.
Tell him
It's
his old short, fat, bald department head said hello.
I will when I see him. Yeah, it's been interesting. I mean, in my first couple of years of teaching electronics, like I said, I had no idea what I was doing. Kirk was basically my mentor. He knew more than I did as a high school kid. Very, very sharp. And then he went off and disappeared, and I didn't see him for 20, 30 years. And then somehow we reconnected through the museum, and he's become very active in terms of working on the TVs. He can take just about any TV and resurrect it and bring it back. I've got several former students. The one that started bringing us TVs in the beginning, he pops in every once in a while. It's kind of cool to have these people who've been with us for over 30 years. So, yep.
Very good. Johnny, you didn't mention the broadcast control room you got back there too.
True. How long do you guys have? No, we quite a few years ago, friends of one of our volunteers were well-to-do real estate brokers in New York, and he talked them into giving us $40,000 to build a reproduction radio studio. So in the front corner of the building, we have a radio studio built in the 1950s with an acoustic tile all over the walls and the ceilings, and the performance room with all the microphones in it, and then the sloped glass, double pane sloped glass, and the control room on the other side. And the control room has every form of audible medium that there ever was. It's all working and interconnected through a mixer panel. So that works well for transcription work. So if somebody comes in with an old family recording on a record and they want to put it onto something modern, turn it into a file, we can do that for them. But yeah, and on November 16th, we've connected up with the Senior Center in Windsor. They're going to be putting on Burns and Allen show. They did last year. They did Fibber McGee and Molly. We have a room, we call it the Event Center, that can sit probably close to 100 people when we get it all cleared out. And they will put their show on in there. And we had last year when they did the first one, we had 70 people show up. So we're going to try to find room to sit at least 100 people. So it's nice to have that center to put on the classes. When we teach the crystal radio building classes, we have a space that can be used for that. we'll have a swap meet December 3rd, I think is the first Saturday in December. And because it's December, we won't hold it outside. We'll have it inside in the event center. So it gives us a lot of flexibility to have that room available. So, yeah.
When are you going to do that Burns and Allen thing again?
That's going to be the senior center is doing it on November 16th, which is a Thursday, I believe, at 3 p.m. Yeah. We do a lot of loaning out the stuff right now. ImagineX is putting on a play called The Night America Panicked, and it's based on Orson Welles' War of the Worlds. And they had their first weekend in South Windsor. I think they had a church this weekend. The play is going to go on at the Hole in the Wall Theater in New Britain. And then the following weekend, they're going to be down in South Glastonbury. But we've loaned them a ton of stuff for all the props, for all the typical equipment that would have been on hand at that time when Orson Welles was producing War of the Worlds. Some of my guys have already gone to see it from this past weekend. They said it's really fascinating because they took a totally different approach. They're not just redoing War of the Worlds. They're showing what happened around it as this thing evolved and people got fritzed out because they thought the Martians were really coming.
That was pretty cool. Which senior center was that again?
Windsor Senior Center.
Windsor.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is perhaps the coolest meeting I've been to yet on Zoom. Thank you for your presentation.
Cool. Thank you. I'm glad you appreciated it. Yeah. You all got to come up. We do group rates. So, you know, if we get 10 or more of you coming up at the same time, we can get you in for $5 a piece. But yeah, we keep it. I mean, adults are 10. And it's funny, I joke with people when they leave after they've been there for 4 to 5 hours being entertained. I said, a lot cheaper than a movie. And you got a lot more entertainment out of it. I said, yes, we did.
Having been there, I would certainly suggest it's a trip down memory lane. Everybody, no matter what age you are, you'll find something up there that jogs your memory.
Yeah.
Doesn't have to be all ham equipment either.
No. It's funny, we got kind of a strange reputation as a male bastion, but it's funny, the families will come in, the moms, the dads, and the kids, and they all have a ball. I'm there on Saturdays, and Mark Heiss and I tag team in terms of giving tours, and Mark will be out there with his group, and I hear them laughing. The one that's laughing the hardest is the mom, because everybody related to this stuff. Quite often it'll be the lady in the group. They'll round the corner and they'll look at the radio and say, "Oh my God, that's Grandma's radio," and they start to light up. And that we've learned that's when we put the zipper on the mouth and shut up and let them carry on. And they start telling all this neat story about that was the radio. We would have to go upstairs, get in our pajamas, turn our beds down, and brush our teeth before we could come down and lay on the rug and listen to the shadow in front of that TV. And they get all rosy cheeked. They get all flustered. They're like so excited, and they go out just beaming because they had that memory, and that's what we can give to them as a memory. And because we cover the decades, we can cover just about any age person. The kids come in and we have a Atari setup running, and they go, "Oh man, I've heard about Atari." I play all the little ones and they sit down and start playing Atari and go nuts. And the personal computers, we have 3 of them set up so they can interact, and they're running like DOS. It's not DOS. It's a faux system because it's much more stable. But we got all the old games and applications on there, and they just go nuts for hours playing on those computers, thinking they're going back in time. So it catches everybody. It really does, and it's kind of cool.
Ed, we need a going to the museum trip committee.
Right.
There you go.
You just volunteered to be the leader. We don't have to worry about, no one here is an adult, so it's we'll probably get in for less money.
Yeah. Well, if you come in individually, it's $7 for a senior, but if you come in as a group, it's $5 for a group. So.
Okay. All right, Brian, do you want to take us home here?
Oh yeah, sure. Tough act to follow. John, I really appreciate you coming out and doing this. I figured this would be a hit. like I said, I haven't been able to make it up, but I plan on it. Although I'm unquestionably the youngest person here, I think, as far as I can see, I may spend more time with tubes than the majority of the people here. I have a fondness for, so I think I'll feel right at home up there. I'm really looking forward to getting up there. I'd like to bring my son too, and maybe we can have a discussion with the club and see about getting a group up there. It was something that was floated out there a while ago. Actually, it's been talked about. I know the interest is certainly there, but yeah, really tremendous. And I know in the beginning I switched the days on you, so I appreciate you being flexible and doing this for us. It was really tremendous. Thanks so much.
Well, doing it on Zoom is very easy. I can sit in my office and do this. So yeah, that's great. Yeah.
Excellent.
Thank you, John. It really was a great.
Thank you very much.
presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you for inviting
Thank
me.
you,
This was fun.
Thank you again.
Thank you. I enjoyed
Alrighty.
that.
All right. So, gentlemen, remember the nominations for election are closing November 1st. So if you need to, after November 1st, we'll be voting. And have a great rest of the week, and we'll talk again.
Okay. Oh,